But we're going to talk a little recruiting today, and we're going to talk about several topics. Number one is, what's the finish got to look like for Notre Dame, right? Off to a great start, top 5 class. I think right now, I'm going to check it real quick, but I think they are number 3 on Rivals. I think they're number 4 on 24/7 Sports. No one cares what the on-3 rankings are, but let me just check what those are real quick. So and Rivals, Notre Dame is currently 3rd, right behind Ohio State and Michigan at number 1, ahead of LSU and Georgia, who are 4 and 5. Notre Dame is also, when you look at the 247 team rankings, the composite, they are 4th, just behind Georgia. And then, of course, Ohio State and Michigan are 1 and 2. They're ahead of LSU and Penn State. So obviously Notre Dame's doing well right now, Ryan. If you look at their average star rankings, also a very solid number right now. Notre Dame is doing very well, in my opinion, when you look at those things, when you look at kind of how they're stacking up against some of those other teams. So let's kind of dive into today how they're going to finish, maybe talk about some potential surprises that we could see maybe come signing day, what would need to happen for that to happen. We're going to get into some team conversation. We're going to talk about which spring breakout players did we see that either flashed breakout or were just pure breakouts. Which ones are most important to this team in the fall for them to continue that success into the fall? And then the third topic is we're going to talk about the transfers. We're going to talk about the players at Notre Dame that transferred out and sort of what are the concerns about those players leaving, not about the concerns about the team or if there's an issue. We all understand why they left, and I have no issue with why they left. I don't necessarily agree with every player that left as far as whether it was or was not the right decision, in my opinion. But I think none of them were any, there's a problem at Notre Dame that has to get addressed. It's just this is the problem of college football, and Notre Dame is no different than everyone else. But more so looking at it practically, what are the concerns about each of them leaving? We'll talk about Buckner and Diggs and Styles and Colley, since those are the guys that are the kind of the post-spring guys that left. I'll be honest, I'm surprised more guys didn't leave, to be completely honest with you. I'm surprised more guys that are a little bit buried in the depth chart didn't leave. I think that, if anything, shows a little bit more good health of the program, that the only guys that left are guys that got beat out by other people, or I think in Logan Diggs' case, that's just been an issue for him since he got to Notre Dame. It is what it is, just wants to be closer to home. I got no ill will for the kid. Played his butt off for Notre Dame this past year. It is what it is. What are the concerns, though? Practical concerns about them leaving. And then also what needs to happen at Notre Dame for them to be okay with those guys leaving? Because I think there needs to be a fair conversation, right? It's not so, wow, they're loaded there. Well, they're loaded there if ...
Right.
Certain things happen, right? But if certain things don't happen, then it is problematic. And so we don't need to overreact to guys leaving, but we can also underreact at times. So we're going to kind of look at it from both angles today. And talk about that from a transfer standpoint as well, right? But I want to start off with some recruiting. I know that makes you happy. I want to talk about, obviously, right now Notre Dame is on the verge of they're building really a third straight really good recruiting class and a second straight really balanced, really good recruiting class. The reason I say that is I think the 2022 class was very good, but it had holes. No safety in that class. Only one wide receiver. Quality quarterback, but not to the degree, in my opinion, that they've gotten in the couple classes later, unless Steve Angeli proves me wrong, which I hope he does, because I like the kid. I think he's a great kid. Just, I don't see it. I got to be honest. I don't see it on film. I don't see that tools. But there were some misses in that class, Ryan, at certain spots. But it was still a good, strong top 10 class. Last year's class, as everybody knows, I view that as a top 5 class. I don't care what the rankings say. There are not more than 5. You could argue 6, but that's as far as I go about classes that I would trade for Notre Dame's. That's how I evaluate it. Like, who would I trade for Notre Dame's? And there's not that many. They're in the process of building another one, Ryan, but it will be determined by how they finish. So we're going to talk about the areas where we're really confident where things are, and then the areas where there's some legitimate concern about how they're going to finish, and then talk about some surprises. But when we first look at it, Ryan, there's no doubt they're in the process of once again building a really, really good class. And the key, we've always said, you've got to stack them on top. Yes. And that's what the staff is in the middle of doing right now with the 2024 class.
I mean, yeah, and there's some positions that are perfect examples of that, which obviously we'll get into, Brian. But like for me, it's like if you have one great recruiting class and then you're just average the next couple years, there's going to be once in a blue moon where you are a really good football team because everything aligns and everything hits. Like, I mean, we saw it with LSU over the course of their career. It's like 2019, fantastic. 2018, not quite as good. 2020, not quite as good. Like, you can always hit when you have one supreme recruiting class. The teams, though, that are sustainable, the teams that on a year-to-year basis are really good football teams, you think about Georgia, you think about Alabama, you think about Ohio State, even like putting them into that conversation, right? The teams that recruit quality talent on a year in and year basis, because you have to ask yourself of why do they keep recruiting that way, right? One, they keep winning. Two, a lot of the players are comfortable with how players before them were developed, right? Like we could say all we want about the Ohio State quarterback thing going to the NFL, right? About that stigma, but it's a very easy sell for CJ Stroud to go to Ohio State when the guy before him is Justin Fields, for instance, right? It's like,
well,
wow,
and the guy before him was Dwayne Haskins, right?
Exactly.
I mean, exactly, yes.
I mean, because we talked about the Ryan Wingo thing yesterday. It's like, yeah, Ryan Wingo is hesitant on Notre Dame, for instance, because it's like, I don't want to be the next, insert player that was good player at Notre Dame, but maybe not an elite player at Notre Dame. I want to be the Jerry Jeudy's of the world, right? I want to be those first round draft picks that are going to be developed in college and are potentially, going to be the Jamar Chases of the world at the next level. Like, that's the trajectory they're looking at. So it's not a coincidence that the really good football teams continue to recruit very well, because winning matters and development matters. And that's what Notre Dame is trying to show. We'll talk about wide receiver here today, for instance, but Notre Dame is recruiting at a high level at wide receiver, for instance, despite not having a ton of production at that position over the last couple of years, despite still trying to turn it to the next level. So when you look at that, I think that there's obviously not coincidences there, but Notre Dame, I think, is trying to really stack not only the strong positions, but really trying to turn the tide and what people's perceptions are of certain positions, which I think will help moving forward, obviously.
Let's talk about where Notre Dame is strong right now. Right. What's the foundation of this class so far? Obviously, you've got a big time quarterback and 5-star on the IB board, a guy that is, I think, a top 40 player according to everyone except for On3, who's a little wacky with some of their rankings, obviously. And it's not an anti-Notre Dame thing because they have Anthony Knapp much higher than I do. They have Isaiah Canyon ranked higher than anybody else by a mile. So it's not an anti-Notre Dame thing. I just don't think their rankings are consistent or make any sense. There's a ton of hypocrisy. Contradictions, I should say, is probably a better term in how they do things. But 5-star quarterback, now a big time receiving class. All right, it was Cam Williams for like 10 months of just Cam Williams, and now it's outstanding. You've got Cam Williams, Isaiah Canyon, and now Micah Gilbert. You have a very good tight end, one of the best hands in the country at tight end. You have a very good corner class, or at least the potential of a good corner class. One guy I really like. Another guy in Carson Hobbs, I'm not as high on. I just have to be honest, I'm not as high on other people of the film, but people who I really trust to evaluate corners, even more than I trust myself in some regards, are very high on Carson Hobbs. So, there's a lot of excitement, I think, on the Notre Dame end about that 1-2 punch at cornerback. And the defensive line class also has taken a big jump in the last couple of weeks, adding Cole Mullins and Bryce Young on top of Owen Wafel. Now, for me, Ryan, the two highest ranked guys I have in this class on defense are both defensive linemen right now. Cole Mullins is my number 1 guy. Owen Wafel is my number 2 guy. And then I have Leonard Moore, number 3. So I'm very high on those two players. I'm much higher on Owen Wafel than other people. I know you are also, because you've always been very high on Owen Wafel. I had to kind of come around after his junior year. You've been like, hey, I see a lot of potential in this kid from day one.
Yeah.
So when I look at it, I say, look, those are the strengths so far. Okay, so but what is going to need to be the finish? Because if Notre Dame doesn't finish strong, this number 3, number 4 ranked class becomes number 14, just like that, if they don't finish well. So let's talk about the areas right now where the finish is important, Ryan, and the areas where we are confident that Notre Dame will, in our opinion, finish well. And right now, the position where I'm the most confident that Notre Dame's going to finish well is a position that we've been very hard on and concerned about in the past, and it's the defensive line. When you look at the board right now, Ryan, closing is needed, but I feel as far as a position where more is needed, they could stop recruiting receivers right now, and it's an excellent class, right? D-line, more is needed. We're going to focus on the positions where more is needed. that is a position as of right now, of all the positions I look at, Ryan, I'm probably most confident right now with where things stand that the next two guys on the board, because 5 is the minimum, the next two guys on the board are going to be really good football players. Much more confident now than I was even 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the Smith twins, who are good players, but are they really needle movers? And now the class looks completely different, and they're in position to really finish strong. So I think that's where we have to begin, and not just from a recruiting ranking standpoint, which I don't really care about. I'm more talking about, are you putting a championship football team on the field? Finishing strong on the defensive line is of the utmost importance of Notre Dame, the 24 class. And I'm a whole lot more confident they're going to finish strong now than I was a month ago. And that's big for Notre Dame.
You know what's funny about recruiting rankings real quick, though, is that when Owen Wapel committed to Notre Dame, I remember he was considered a top 200 recruit by at least one service. And then he goes out and has a dominant junior year. And all of a sudden he's a 3-star by basically everyone, which is just absolutely hysterical to me. It really is just how some of this recruiting stuff works as far as the rankings perspective. But I'll say this, Brian, this is why I don't like the crystal ball stuff at times, right? Because 2 months ago, everyone's telling you, this is going to be TJ Lindsey. This is going to be the Smith twins. Like, they're going to be in the Notre Dame class, right? And then we know things change, and they change very, very quickly. And the concerns that we had with the recruitment on the side of Al Washington and the defensive line staff, right, was troubling, to say the least, for a while there. Because let's look at the indicators here, right? 2 of the more talented players on the board. Let's go with Justin Scott. For a while there, it was trending in a terrible direction with Justin Scott. And you're just like, man, that is a massive miss if you can't get a 5-star defensive lineman out of the city of Chicago, not the state of Chicago,
Catholic
the city
school,
of Chicago.
At a Catholic school, a high academic Catholic school. Yeah.
Whose family is very pro Notre Dame in the academics piece and staying closer to home piece. Like, there's a lot of things that align there. Now, flash forward to the present day, there's still a battle that needs to happen with Justin Scott, but you feel better about that battle right now than what you did, a couple months ago, as far as where it was trending. And then Elijah Rushing's another big thing, right? And it's not even the fact that, like, us predicting that they'll get Elijah Rushing in the end. I really just think that it is very telling and very positive, the fact that Notre Dame has put themselves back in the position with Elijah Rushing. The fact that he is going on an official visit, whether they eventually land Elijah Rushing or not, for a while there, you just weren't hearing anything from the two sides about the optimism for one another, right? And then all of a sudden, Elijah Rushing, who's been on a visit to Notre Dame, an unofficial visit, who now has an official visit to Notre Dame. And then I hear a couple days ago that Elijah basically said, Notre Dame is recruiting me as hard or harder than just about anybody that is recruiting me. So
he said that to you. So this isn't something that we saw somewhere else. He said that to you specifically.
Yes. Directly. Yeah. So the fact that you are in a good position with 1 5-star defensive lineman and then in another elite defensive lineman in the class, you are still battling with, and it's being received well by a guy like Elijah Rushing. And then the simple fact of, hey, a couple months ago, you had 1 commit in the class on the defensive line, and that was the only commit in the class for a long time. All of a sudden, you look and you say, Bryce Young, Cole Mullins. Now it's like, if you get Justin Scott and then you land one of, not even including Elijah Rushing for a second, but if you land one of Logan Thomas, who they're in a much better position with than they once were, or a Malachi Williams out of Pennsylvania, who's another kid that Notre Dame is in a much better position than they were a couple months ago after the visit for the Blue Gold game. You look at that and say, man, like, if you end up with Owen Wafel, Justin Scott, Bryce Young, Cole Mullins, and then one of the 3 other names that I mentioned, that's a dang good class, man. Yeah. It's really good.
I want to address a couple things about this, Ryan. Number one is there's a narrative going on our board to a degree of people saying, well, you should take back the things you said about Al Washington, or it was overstated. I said, no, it wasn't. And I think by trying to kind of retcon what had happened in the past, you're actually taking away from what he's doing now.
Yeah.
There's, look, it was his first year and the boards are, and like, what you think you're saying is not actually what's going on. Saying, well, the board was pretty much finished. Well, that's even more inexcusable that you lost Jason Moore, because you already had the rest of your class figured out, right? He did not do a good job in year 1. And I think people trying to spin the first year as some excuse for why he didn't do well. Well, why didn't that excuse matter for Chancey Stuckey? Why didn't that excuse matter for Mike Mickens his first year when he couldn't even go on the road and recruit his first year? So I don't buy that, and I think you're taking away from what Coach Washington is doing now. He didn't have success his first year. He knows that. And instead of making excuses or wallowing in self-pity or blaming other people, he's like, okay, I'm at Notre Dame. This is the job I got to do. He's made some corrections in how he goes about it. Look, I was talking to Sean Davis the other day when he was having a conversation with Justin Scott, and he was talking about Coach Washington and how the difference in how they interact now from where it was before. That's a very clear difference, and it's being impactful, right? So I think in life, to me, if I have a coach who's willing to say what I did wasn't good enough and I got to do better, that says a lot more about Al Washington as a man than just saying, well, the first year is just a mulligan because of whatever. And he was always doing this. It's just, no, you're taking away from the fact that this is a guy that looked in the mirror and said, this is the standard I've set for myself. This is the standard in Notre Dame, and I'm going to work my butt off to meet it. And he's starting to do it. So I think that's a much better story. It's also true than trying to retcon last year and making excuses for last year as if like, well, he's not doing anything different. It's just results are better because of whatever reason. I'm excited about the fact that he's made those changes. And that's what you need on this staff, because we saw too many coaches in the past when things weren't going to go well, they would start making excuses. Well, the academics are too hard, or, this is just the kind of kid that we like, or whatever the case may be, or we have to shop down a different aisle, or he's not a Notre Dame kid. That was the end all be all, right? Well, he just wasn't a Notre Dame kid, meaning he wanted to win a championship. Is that what you refer to as not being a Notre Dame kid? Where Al Washington's not doing that. Hey, he didn't get off to a good start with Justin Scott in several ways. Some is made public and some has not been made public. But you know what he's done? He's regrouped, right? And now he's doing a great job on it. Elijah Rushing, for whatever reason, Notre Dame was trailing big there for a while. Early on, things were going well, fell behind. Now they're trending again. That's great. And he's also doing a great job with Kingston Viliamo-Asa, which, Ryan, you've talked about. Who's not even a defensive lineman.
Monumental part of that recruitment. For people that don't know that one, I mean, because they're going to assume Kingston Viliamo-Asa, who's a star linebacker out of St. John Bosco in Bellflower, California, they're going to assume that's an Al Golden project, that's a Max Bola project, and then that's, maybe a Chad Bowden obviously is included in all of these guys, right? So I have to say Chad's name consistently. Like, if I'm talking about a recruit, Chad Bowden is a part of the recruitment.
Just assume it. Just assume it. Because that's his job. I mean, and he's very, very good at it. Exactly.
And Kingston has spoke high of Chad, of Al Golden, of even Max Bola recently, because he's been developing a relationship there. But one guy that you cannot talk about Kingston with Notre Dame and not mention, you can't forget about Al Washington in that recruitment. Because why? Al Washington was the linebacker coach at Ohio State, and he had a great relationship with Kingston before he came to Notre Dame. Let's also not forget this, Brian. One of the 3 top schools for Kingston is Ohio State. A lot of the reason for that is because Al Washington laid groundwork early on in that.
And he was still there, right?
That matters, right? So Al Washington has also been able to be a big help in that recruitment as well. So if Notre Dame also lands Kingston in this class, talking about the linebacker position, you also have to give a nice little pat on the back to Al Washington there, because he had a big assist in that one. There's no doubt.
I want to talk too, Ryan. It's like, you're doing better recruiting when a buddy of mine calls me yesterday and he's talking to me about Malachi Williams against Logan Thomas, and he's trying to say he's going to be disappointed if they get Logan Thomas because of how good Malachi Williams is. And I'm thinking, first of all, you're missing a boat a little bit on Logan Thomas. This is a good football player. But second of all, like, this is like first world problems that are so different than where we were a month or two ago. When you and I were talking about, like, dude, they're going to end up taking this kid. I just know it. And I'm going to be very disappointed by it. Like, are we seriously arguing between Malachi Williams, who has one of the highest ceilings of any defensive end in the country, anywhere, any name, any ranking, whatever, Notre Dame or not, or Logan Thomas, who's like a top 100 prospect, who is a really twitchy, athletic kid who can do a lot of different things?
From Texas,
if that's your argument of which one of those do you want, think about just how different that is from 2 weeks ago when we did a recruiting show and we're trying to make people feel better about potentially getting the Smith twins, right? Who are good football players. This is not a shot on the Smith twins. They're good, solid football players. And that's what we said at the time, but they're not needle movers, right? Now, somebody just said in the chat, take them both. I would, for certain. I would take them both. Sure. But the point is, we're having a different conversation now than we were then. And a big part of it is not just who they might get, because it's really risky to bank all your energy on who they might get. My good feelings right now are who they already have in the class, because now it's about putting the finishing touches on it. And it allows you to narrow in your focus. So, I mean, when you do look at the finish, obviously it's Justin Scott inside. Now, Notre Dame is doing a good job of not putting all their eggs in the Justin Scott basket until he makes a decision. They're out today. If you're on the board, we put it out there where the coaches are today. They're going to see Sean Sevillano today, who's down in Tampa. There's some other interior type of guys that are on the board that they're still talking to, because this staff is doing a great job of, we're just not going to assume that we're not going to put all of our resources in here at a position where we have a need. Yeah. Now, you can put all your resources into one particular fourth wide receiver, because if you don't get them, you're fine. You can put all your resources into Carter Nelson at tight end, because if you don't get him, you're fine, because you're not even sure if you have room for a second tight end yet. But at a defensive line, there's still needs remaining. But now that you have 3 of the 5 desired guys, there are some guys you can drop off the board. There are some guys that Notre Dame was looking at. I won't say their names because it'll come across as disrespectful, but you and I they're solid players. There's some upside there, but there's some risk involved, because they were far from finished products and didn't have the ceilings of a Bryce Young, who's also far from being a finished product. Well, now it's kind of like those guys are off the board now because they got high level talents. Bryce Young from an upside standpoint, Cole Mullins, who's a guy that I like right now, and also from an upside standpoint. So I feel much better about the defensive line now than I did before. It allows you to put more resources into Justin Scott and to Logan Thomas and Malachi Williams and Elijah Rushing, number 1. So I think that's a great place to start, Ryan. And there's a chance, if they finish the way that they need to, and again, they still have to prove it. I think this D-line class is going to be a little bit more balanced than last year's. Last year's D-line class had every bit the upside of this year's D-line class. Even if they get Justin Scott and Elijah Rushing or Malachi or Logan Thomas, last year's D-line class upside-wise is every bit as good as this class upside-wise. The difference is there's some higher floors in this class than last year, in my opinion. When you look at Justin Scott, who is not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination, but at 6'5", 310, you're going to get away with things that, 275-pound guy can't get away with as you develop. Cole Mullins has a higher floor, in my opinion. I think that Malachi's floor is a lot higher now based on what I see of his body than it was watching his junior film. Elijah Rushing, obviously, incredibly high floor. So, and it's a different style of player, which is important as well. When you look at the rest of it, though, Ryan, that's a position I feel really good about. The rest of the positions, honestly, are a little bit more, boy, this is going to be interesting to see how it finishes out, right? And I think when you look at running back, which is there's still a need there. When you look at offensive line, where there's still a need. When you look at linebacker, where there's still a need, and safety, where there's still a need, there's some areas where, boy, there's some question marks. But there's another position, Ryan, that I think that Notre Dame has kind of met their need numbers-wise, which is something that could allow them to finish strong, and that is corner.
Yep.
The fact that they already have Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs, Mike Mickens is going by to see Caleb Beasley today. That's another to see to his school to check in on Caleb Beasley. They can't actually talk to him face-to-face, I don't believe, at this point in time. But now, because you have those other 2, you can put all your resources into the Aaron Scott, Caleb Beasley basket. And they love Aaron Scott. But from everything I've been told for months, the number 1 corner they've wanted from day one is Caleb Beasley. He's still talking to him. He's still listening. He's been on campus. You feel better about the chance to potentially flip him down the road. It's not going to be easy, but now that this is all Mike Mickens has to worry about, you start feeling a little bit better about this one. So that's another position where, from an impact talent standpoint and a recruiting ranking standpoint, that could be one that could have a big impact as we move forward.
Well, and I feel like we don't talk about him enough, obviously, on this show, but Leonard Moore was such a just massive get for Notre Dame, man. And I feel like we didn't talk about it enough at the time, at least from a fan perspective. Because, again, I remember when he was committed to Notre Dame, there were literally a bunch of people in the chat like, this is a 3-star kid. This is a 3-star kid. Notre Dame can do better. And now we're sitting here as he's rated as a top 150 kid by at least one service. And you look at that, you say, continuing the trend in Texas, getting a 6'2", 175-pound kid with length for days, good movement skills. Leonard Moore is a really good football player, and Carson Hobbs has upside as well to develop on the next level. Like, there's no doubt about it, right? So you have 2 corners in this class, and if you ended with a Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs, We know that the Notre Dame staff and Mike Mickens are very high on both of those players, and they would be ecstatic for having that. But that also gives you a baseline, which I think is the most important thing. It's a baseline of, I know who my guys are in this class. I have my needs met, like you said. Now Mike Mickens could say, you know what, guys? We know who our target is now, right? Like, we know who our two guys are that we really like. We know who the guy, though, that we have a really high opinion on in a Caleb Beasley. I am going to put my emphasis and my energy on that kid. Because if you get a player like a Caleb Beasley at some point to flip from the University of Tennessee, then Brian, I mean, this completely changes my opinion of this cornerback class. I like it already. But if they get a Caleb Beasley, now I say Caleb Beasley, Leonard Moore as your outside guys, and that might open possibilities, especially if Carson Hobbs takes a big jump as a senior. I can now go, hey, man, maybe he could be a safety. Maybe he could be a nickel. That could also help a couple different positions. So not only is the cornerback spot in a good spot in the sense that you hit your numbers and now you can focus on elite talent. If you do get that elite talent, I think that could bolster the entire secondary, not just the cornerback spot, because then you could talk about being flexible with a Carson Hobbs, with a Leonard Moore. They could play a couple different positions potentially on the next level. Heck, I mean, Caleb Beasley could even play safety if you felt like it. Not that the need would ever be a rise there, but I think that really gives you
could Leonard Moore in
flexibility.
some situations too, right? I think Leonard Moore could as well as a cover safety if the need is there. Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Now let's talk about the positions where there is a little bit more concern about just exactly how they're going to finish. And we'll start on offense. Obviously, there's question marks on offense about what the numbers are going to look like. Do they take a fourth receiver? Do they decide to take a second tight end? I think those things are still being worked out. And the reason that there's not a rush to figure them out is because the kids that they like are not deciding anytime soon. Carter Nelson's not deciding anytime soon. And if he did, it wouldn't be for Notre Dame. And Jason Robinson, I don't believe, is deciding anytime soon. And so there's some time to kind of work all this stuff out. And then, of course, there's running back. Running back went from a luxury, in my opinion, to a need to take a second running back in the class, which is why you're seeing the board expand a little bit. Obviously, they offered Xavier Robinson, right?
Yes, correct.
It's a massive kid that they offered as a running back. When Coach Stuckey went out to see him from Oklahoma, somebody asked them, like, he's about to commit to Oklahoma. Why would you do this? Well, you just saw him tweet yesterday, I think, that, hey, I'm extending my recruitment. This is exactly why you get involved. Because as more schools get involved before a kid decides, then you have a greater shot of getting him to push things back. And now you've got a shot to get in the game.
And now he's taking his official visits. Yeah,
correct. And so now Nathaniel Palmer is a guy that they went down and saw today, who's a really talented back in his own right. You still have Darian Dupree on the board. Anthony Carey and Keedron Young are coming up in June. Right now, Ryan, I'm confident they're going to land a second back. My question mark is, where on the board will that second back be?
Sure.
Because it's one thing to just land a guy for numbers. It's another thing to land a guy with impact talent. And we talked a little bit about this in a previous show at running back. I mean, right now, the goal right now is you've got to get one of Keedron Young or Anthony Carey. Obviously, Xavier Robinson's a guy that you just now got a relationship with. But to me, those two guys are the must get so far in this class, right? I mean, of guys that right now you have a realistic shot at. I don't view them as having a shot at Xavier Robinson right now, Ryan. I mean, I think you just got on that kid, right? Yep. And when he announced the officials he's taking, he didn't say he's taking one to Notre Dame. He said he's taking was like Oklahoma, Oklahoma State. What was it, like TCU?
Something like that, yeah.
I think it was like the third one. So Notre Dame's not in the game yet, but at least they have a shot to get in the game. He's a talented back. I mean, don't get it twisted. He's a very talented back at 225 pounds. I mean, that's a kid put up monster numbers last year. You know, he reminds me of at a high school. He reminds me of a bigger version of Quinshon Judkins when I watched Quinshon come out of high school, because Quinshon was a guy too that just wasn't fast. He just had great feet, great vision, and he just knew how to find holes. And that's how Xavier Robinson is as well. Stylistically, just a much bigger version of what Quinshon was. Because I had Quinshon as a 4-star coming out of high school, Ryan, because Notre Dame was actually recruiting him for a while. This was before you came on. So this is a position right now, Ryan, that is a little bit in flux. We're going to have to see who comes up for June. It's there. This isn't going to be settled anytime soon. It's going to be settled in June. Offensive line, though, Ryan, this is one right now that there's a lot of uncertainty, because we just don't know where things stand with some of their top prospects. Gerby Lambert, Styles Prescott, Grant Bricks. Now, they will be out to see Grant Bricks today and tomorrow, see his high school today and tomorrow. They've been out to see Kevin Haywood. They've been out to see, I think Al Golden is not Al Golden, but Joe Rudolph, I think, is going to see Aiden Lynch at some point in time. They just went and checked out a North Carolina offensive lineman.
They just saw Aiden Lynch, I think, 2 days ago, or went to his high school 2 days ago.
And then there's another North Carolina kid that they went and saw the day that they were looking at, that they went and saw Sullivan Absher. So I don't know who the next 2 offensive linemen are going to be. They really they need 2 now. Originally they were going to get away with taking 3, but the reason you need 2 now is because neither of the 2 guys you offered are tackles. And if Notre Dame is going to try to convince themselves that Anthony Knapp is a tackle, I'm concerned about the evaluating ability. He's got some tools. They like him more than I do. It's fine. It's all good. I see some tools there. I'm just not as high on him as Joe Rudolph is. But the one thing that we should all agree on is you can't, if he can play tackle, great. If it works out, great. But you can't just bank on that and only take 1 other tackle in this class when you need 2 tackles in this class. And I'd say the same thing about Peter Jones. So you've almost forced yourself to take a second tackle in this class. So now instead of just needing 1 guy, you now need 2. Yeah. And as of right now, Ryan, that's probably the one position where I'm the least confident in how they're going to finish. I think offensive line and safety are the 2 positions where I have the biggest question marks about exactly how they're going to finish. And that's just not where you want to be when you're the University of Notre Dame. You don't want to be having these big question marks on the offensive line.
Well, when Coach Heastan was still here, I had zero hesitation about the Notre Dame offensive line. I felt really good about them getting Gerby Lambert. I felt good about them getting Caleb Brewer in the class. And I'm like, that, add that into Peter Jones and maybe 1 more offensive line. Like, that's a good offensive line, man. I mean, Brian, if I told you ended with Caleb Brewer, Gerby Lambert, and Peter Jones, and then maybe 1 other guy, you'd be feeling great about where you were from an offensive line perspective, especially after the 5-man class you got in 2023. I mean, you feel good about that, not 8 to 9-man haul in a 2-year span. You feel really good, especially with obviously Coach Heastan coaching it. I mean, you feel good. But here's the simple fact of it. You get a new coach. I have a good opinion of Joe Rudolph, the coach, right? The developer. I think he's going to do a really good job as a coach at Notre Dame. But the recruiting thing is something that I thought wasn't going to be an issue or an area of question, I guess is a better way to put it, right? But you come in and there's just a different evaluation than maybe what I would see as this offensive line. I think that's my main issue right now is like, I just don't see how you could see certain guys at tackle and not see Caleb Brewer as one, for instance. Like, that's just kind of my question mark, right? And the Gerby Lambert situation doesn't help anything because you just haven't – I don't know what that kid's doing, man. I really don't know, Brian. He's like, I like Massachusetts. I'm just going to stay here forever. Like, I'm not moving. It's so weird, man. He hasn't taken any visits unofficially, officially, just kind of sitting. He was originally supposed to be there for the blue and gold game, obviously, and ended up not making that trip. And I know people at the time were like, oh, man, that's really terrible for Notre Dame. And I'm just like, yeah, it is. But also, he hasn't been anywhere else, though. It's not like he's going somewhere else. It's not like he canceled Notre Dame trip to go down to
Penn State or something. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's just not going anywhere. So I think that this situation could be flipped very quickly because if you end up getting Gerby Lambert and then 1 other guy, you feel good about the offensive line class at the end of the day, right? But there are a lot more question marks. I felt a lot better about Coach Heastan closing on Gerby Lambert than what I do Joe Rudolph now, just because I don't know much about that relationship that they have together. I know Harry Heastan had a good relationship with Gerby Lambert. On the other side, I'm not sure what Joe Rudolph's relationship is with Gerby at this point. And then to your other, the other part of it, I felt like for a while, you're like, okay, they like Styles Prescott, they like Caleb Brewer. They're going to get one of those 2, to go with Gerby, and you feel good about that, right? But now the situation is Styles Prescott, who is a guy that Notre Dame has liked for a while, he's just kind of in limbo right now, right? Like, for whatever reason, a decision has not been made.
He's still talking about taking more visits this summer, and it's interesting. I'll just leave it that way.
So the board outside of the 100% known is that Gerby Lambert has quickly become and was always for a while. He's a can't miss prospect
Yeah.
in this class for Notre Dame. Like, they
Meaning
need
can't
Kirby.
miss. When we talk about can't miss, we're not saying he's not a can't miss. He's going to be a great player no matter what. We're saying you can't miss him in this class, meaning you can't not get him. He's a must get,
Yes,
is what we're saying. And you know, the concerning thing for me is he didn't offer Gearby at Virginia Tech.
he didn't.
He didn't offer Caleb. He offered Caleb Brewer, but didn't really recruit him, which is kind of like, well, why would you not recruit a kid like Gearby Lambert? So I don't know what the heck is going on, and I don't want to raise the red flag too much right now or sound the alarm too much, because a lot of us, we just don't know. We don't know
Yes.
what the communication's been like with him and Gearby Lambert. We just know that it's just not where it was. Because right now, if Harry Hiestan's still here, Caleb Brewer's committed to Notre Dame right now. Of that, I have
think
zero
so.
doubt. I have
I think
zero
so.
doubt.
Yeah.
And maybe Gearby is. Now, at offensive line, that's going to happen sometimes when you lose an offensive line coach, because that more than any position is built on the trust and the relationship with that position coach, right? And so, you know, maybe Coach Rudolph didn't feel that Gearby Lambert was a realistic option, and that's why he didn't recruit him. I don't know. Maybe he knew how tight Gearby was with Notre Dame and Penn State and said, hey, we're just not going to waste my time there. Maybe that's the case. It's not so much that he didn't evaluate him. So I want to be clear. I don't know why he didn't offer him at Virginia Tech, and I don't know why Gearby hasn't taken any visits now, but just the reality is it is concerning.
Yes.
Now, some positive things. I do think they're making moves with Grant Bricks. Ryan, I have you know, done some film study of him. You and I have talked about this. I like this junior film a lot more than the sophomore film.
Yep.
My only question with him for you would be, I see a lot of people listing him as a guard, and I get that off sophomore film, but off junior film, he looks like a tackle to me.
Yep.
In my opinion, and a physical player. So that's one where they're making some headway there with the kid from Iowa. Makes me feel a little bit better about where things are going than I did before. So he's a kid that I've definitely, my opinion of him has grown quite a bit since I've really dove into the junior film. But there's still a lot of work to be done there. There's no doubt. But at least you feel like, okay, that's a more viable option. Like this, I like him a whole lot better than I like Kevin Haywood as a player, for example.
Same.
You know, so we'll see how they finish, but it's a concern. It is a concern as of right now.
And even if you get Grant Bricks and one other not named Gearby Lambert, the question is still going to be do you have a left tackle in that class? Like that's a major thing for me, because I think Grant Bricks could play right tackle in the next level. I think he could play pretty easily. I mean, he literally plays it now in high school, but can he play left tackle? I have questions there, right? I mean,
Right.
Anthony Knapp, can he play left tackle? I have questions. Like there's the questions out there. So I think really, I mean, and we talk about, you know, whether Joe Walt and Blake Fisher are going to be back for a fourth year and Emil Wagner continuing to develop and the next left tackle at Notre Dame. I think if I was a betting man, the guy that I would predict to maybe not be there out of Fisher and Alt is Alt, because he's the more accomplished player at this point, right? He's might go in the top 10 in next year's class. I mean, that's just an assumption that I'm going to make. So the future of the left tackle position is one at Notre Dame where you have a lot of question marks. I have a lot of questions about the future of the left tackle position at Notre Dame. And I think that's why Gearby Lambert matters so much, because he's the one guy that's on the board that I say that's a left tackle on the next level. And again, like, will it all work out? Will he develop properly? Like, those questions are always there, but he has the frame, the size, the foot quickness, the length to look at and say, but he's going to play left tackle the next level. Is he going to be any good? We'll see, right? That's the troubling part with evaluating and projecting sometimes. But he has the makeup to play left tackle the next level. I'm just not sure if there's a ton of guys on Notre Dame's board that do easily translate to left tackle the next level.
Well, and with Bricks, it's because he doesn't pass block a ton. I mean, that's just the nature of the offense that they run. So
I think he's a little more athletic than Sullivan Absher, but very Sullivan Absher vibes on film as far as his strengths.
How he's used. Yeah,
Yes.
I do. I completely agree with the notion that he's more athletic than, especially his junior film is more athletic than, he's got more of tackle traits.
More explosive.
It's just more of but we just don't see him do it a whole lot. So how can I possibly project a guy in a left tackle that I've seen 3 times pass set?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just hard to do. Let's move on to linebacker, Ryan, because linebacker is an interesting position when we talk about the finish, because I feel better now than I did a month ago, but I still don't feel great about it. And there's some things that I think are happening that I'm kind of okay with.
Yeah.
Michigan is trending very well with Cole Sullivan right now. As you know, I've come around on Cole Sullivan as being a good, solid prospect, but I've always said I don't want him and Bodie Cahoon in the same class, and I like Bodie Cahoon better than Cole Sullivan. Yeah, Cole Sullivan, my concern was, where does he play at Notre Dame? I actually think he's a better fit in the Michigan defense than I do the Notre Dame defense. The problem is, if you're not going to get Cole Sullivan, I feel good about where they are with Bodie Cahoon. The question is, but who else are you going to get? And that's where we're at right now. Obviously, Notre Dame is in a good position with Kingston, Viliama, Asa, but so is Ohio State, right? So the close is going to be important. I really believe it's going to come down to one of those two guys based on
I agree.
what I've been told and what you've been able to gather from talking to him. And so you've got to close there. That is an absolute must get. This linebacker class will never come close to expectations, in my opinion, if you don't get Kingston in the class. There's just nobody else on the board right now that has the combination of floor and ceiling that he possesses. There's some ceiling guys in there, including the next guy I'm going to mention, but no one that has the combination of the two. Then there's other guys on the board. Chris Cole, right? There's Brian Huff. And then Al Washington this past week, since they've got on the road, has gone out to see a lot of other 2024 linebackers. There's a lot of kids they're going out to see. So clearly they are trying to expand the board, because it's not a given that they're going to be able to close on the guys that are on the board now. They have closed on none of them so far. You know, you've mentioned that Bodie Cahoon has talked about maybe moving his date up, but he hasn't done that yet, right? And so Kingston is a guy that they're doing a good job with, but there's still work to be done. So there's a lot of guys in this conversation, Ryan, that if they end up with Bodie Cahoon, Kingston, Viliama Asa, and one of Brian Huff or Chris Cole, I'm good. I'm really good with this linebacker class, especially if it's Chris Cole, because he's more of a rover. And so, but at the same time, I don't feel great that they're going to get even two of those four, much less three of those four at this point in time, just because you can't count out Ohio State when it comes to Kingston. Depending on who you talk to, there's Ohio State people think they lead for Kingston. I personally think Notre Dame leads for Kingston, but either way, it's not great. And the close is going to be important. So linebacker recruiting right now is probably my second biggest question mark that I have. Actually, third biggest question mark. I think offensive line is still ahead of it, and then safety is still my number one question mark.
I think linebacker is very boomer bust in 2024 to a degree, right? Because you're like, I mean, if you get to your point, Brian, if you get a Kingston Viliamoasa and you get a Bodie Cahoon, and then you get one of those other couple linebackers we talked about, I mean, I think the dream scenario is that you get Chris Cole as that third linebacker, right? So that, because they would all, I think, fit together very well. I mean, that's a really good class, man. I mean, we're talking about Kingston, who's a top 100 football player in the 2024 class. You talk about Chris Cole, who I would argue might have 5-star upside. Like, he's close, man. If not, like, he might be 4.5.
It's not an argument, Ryan.
Yeah.
It's not an argument. I mean, at least it's not going to be with me. It's, okay, sure. Mm-hmm.
And especially seeing that kid in person, man, because I'm like, that kid is athletic on film. And then I saw his frame in person. I'm like, that kid's going to be 6'3", 230. And he's probably still going to be able to play rover at that size because he's just so long everywhere, man. So you look at him with that upside he has, and then the fact that Bodie Cahoon is just a good player. Like, I mean, just flat out, if that's your third linebacker in the class, you're in a good spot there, man. Like, you're doing pretty well. But the fact of the matter is that Chris Cole is taking an official in June. That's great, right? You've made headway there, but it's not a foregone conclusion that Chris Cole ends up in this class if you're Notre Dame
by any stretch. Not even close to being a foregone conclusion. Yeah.
And then you got Kingston, who's obviously visiting in June for an official visit. He's taking USC, Ohio State, Notre Dame. That's his top three. We believe that is a Notre Dame Ohio State battle when all is said and done, because I just feel like he's the type of kid that's going to leave home. Like, I just don't see him playing in California, but we shall see. So in theory, this could be a really good class.
And there's some other guys on the board too. Aaron Childs, somebody's brought up, who's a stud. But he's scheduled a visit, but I don't even know if he's going to still be uncommitted by the time we get to invade, and
never know.
They're so far behind on that kid right now that it's, and it's telling that so far they've been on the road now day 5 and they've yet to go out and see Aaron Childs. I think that tells you everything you need to know about where Notre Dame thinks they are with him. I love them, but they're just,
Oh, he's a great
There's
player.
just never been much interest from him. And he set up a visit to Notre Dame, but it's like, okay, we'll see. We'll see if he
Yeah.
actually makes it. I'm at the point now where it's like if he shows up on campus, I'm going to be surprised. I'll
Right.
be very pleasantly and happily surprised,
Sure.
but I'll be surprised. That's why we're not focusing on like Aaron Childs, like Sammy Brown's another one. They're not getting Sammy Brown. We're trying to
They're
be
not.
realistic with guys that are on the board right now. We could have talked about Brandon Baker on the offensive line. They offered him. I guess anything had happened, but they're not going to get
Sure.
Brandon Baker, right? We're
No.
trying to give you realistic options right now. And Sammy Brown's not a realistic option at linebacker. Aaron Childs right now is not a realistic option at linebacker. And that's what makes it a little bit challenging is that
Yep.
you've got to, this is one of those positions where you've got to hit the inside straight. And that's hard to do in recruiting. And I'll say this, Ryan, there's a chance that if you land the right guys, you're landing a class whose upside is every bit as good as the last two.
Yeah.
Because I'll stack Chris Cole's upside up against anybody that Notre Dame's landed in recent years.
Yeah.
Now his floor's on the lower side compared to other guys, but I'll put his upside up against anybody. And Bodie and Kingston both have high upsides. I don't know. I don't have Kingston as a 5-star upside guy right now. Ryan, I was like 4.5. I think he's like a top 50 kind of guy upside wise.
Yep.
But it's very high, and Bodie has a very high upside as well. But you've got to hit the inside straight. I mean, we're talking about 4 guys right now that we feel they have a legitimate shot at. Is that fair? Well, 5, because Cole Sullivan's still in there right now. I mean, They could turn things around. They thought they were going to lose Michael Gilbert a week before they got him as well.
Sure.
But Cole Sullivan, Kingston, Bodie, Chris Cole, Brian Huff right now to me are the 5 most realistic options.
Yeah.
That means you got to bat over 500, and that's tough. I mean that's tough. That's going to be a tough close.
I mean, because if you don't get Kingston and you don't get Chris Cole, for instance, right? I still think that they're going to have a tremendous chance at Bodie Cahoon no matter what in that scenario. But then you're going to start to talk about if you can't make headway with a Brian Huff moving forward and you can't get back in the right spot with Cole Sullivan, then you might need to expand the board again if that's a need that you need to hit, which is they've already expanded the board a lot. It's been I mean, what is there, like 28 linebackers that have been offered by Notre Dame this cycle? Like it's a large number. So yeah, man, it's one of those situations where we could be looking at a really good class or we could be looking at an underwhelming class. Like I just don't think there's too much in between on this one. Like they're either going to hit that inside straight or they're going to strike out a couple times and it's going to get a little hairy. That's just kind of how I see it.
Yeah. That's the
boomer
feeling
bust.
right now.
Boomer bust is the linebacker spot, I believe, in 2024.
Yep. That's where we're at. Let's talk safety recruiting, Ryan. This to me is probably the biggest question mark that I have. It's either this or offensive line to me. And obviously getting Kennedy Urlacher was a great start, but you need at least 2 more. And I think there's an argument to be made that possibly 4, as long as one of those guys is a potential maybe move somewhere else kind of guy. But 3 is the number I'm good with. If they can flip Caleb Beasley, I'm good with 3.
Yeah.
Good with 3 safeties. If you can't flip Caleb Beasley or get Aaron Scott, and I have zero confidence in them getting Aaron Scott right now. I mean, I think he likes Notre Dame a lot. I just think he's always liked Michigan and Ohio State a lot more. That's just the reality of it. Looking at it, Ryan, outside of you've got Kennedy Urlacher in the class. There's other guys on the board: Davis Andrews, DeJuan Lane, Paul Menke, Marquise Gallegos, who has faded a little bit. You've got Oliver Miles, and did I mention DeJuan Lane yet?
Yeah.
Okay, and then they're going out tomorrow to see Jalen McClain. Now, my hope is that they can somehow remind him of why he liked Notre Dame so much at the beginning, and get him off of the NIL track. The locked in focus on the NIL track. If they can get some movement when they go see him tomorrow, that would be great. Obviously, let the coaches know and just get on the phone and talk to him and just remind him of the opportunities that Notre Dame presents him. Yes, we're not going to give you an upfront guaranteed amount of money, but trust me, look what our last star safety made, right? That kind of thing. Made $1 million in a year. So I think when you look at that, Ryan, that's a big one too. But right now I look at it and I'm like, I could see them getting any of those guys. I could see them landing all those guys, meaning each individual one, not all of them together. But I could also see him missing on all those guys. as well. And with Davis Andrews talking to you about possibly pushing this thing back a little bit, that was the one that concerned me. Like, like you're having even trouble closing on Davis Andrews. You start feeling a little bit shaky about it. So then you get in like Paul Menke. I like him a ton. Oliver Miles is a guy that the staff's very high on. He's very athletic. I just don't necessarily see a great football player yet. I see more Ramon Henderson than I see Xavier Watts early on. Just fine. There's a lot of guys on the board, but, I'm not sure who they're going to close on at this point in time. And that's the concerning one for me. And the other part of the concern is the reason I'm a little bit more confident in O-line and linebackers because, number one, track record. Joe Rudolph has a track record. Like, so part of me, deep down, I'm like, I think they're going to be okay, even though I'm very concerned because of his track record. And as these kids go in the process and they get to know him better, the pedigree is going to speak for itself, right? And linebacker, it's like, once Marcus Freeman starts really ramping things up and getting involved, and as these kids get to know Max Bullough a little bit better, that's going to help as well. So there's a track record involved. Safety, with all due respect, Chris O'Leary's track record is not good as far as closing. It's not good at all. I mean, especially with top-level prospects. I mean, he couldn't close on Xavier Nwankpa. He couldn't close on Peyton Bowen. And I don't fault him for that, but it just is what it is. They didn't get Peyton Bowen. I mean, I'm not saying, Chris O'Leary screwed it up. I don't know what he could have done different, but the fact is he didn't get him, right? And they got a Don Shula and Ben Mintz who are good football players, but there's also a lot of high-level safeties last year that they did miss on. And so now you're in a situation where I like Kennedy Urlacher. He's a good football player, but you've got to build on top of Kennedy Urlacher, if you know what I'm saying. Yes. And I don't know. I don't feel great about where they are in that regard with closing. Now, the good news is there's a lot of really good safeties they're involved in, right? If they get two of Davis Andrews, DeJuan Lane, Paul Menke, trying to think I'm forgetting some of the safeties on the board, Jalen McClain.
Marquise Gallegos.
Like, to me, Gallegos is more on the Kennedy Urlacher level. Once you got Kennedy, for me, Gallegos would be off the board for me. Like, that's the floor. Kennedy and Gallegos were the floor. Now that you got Kennedy, who I think is a better player than Marquise Gallegos, it's got to be better than him. Or a guy like Oliver Miles, who is not a better safety than him right now because he's more of an athlete, but at least has a really high ceiling. He's got really good size. He's over 6'1". He's got tremendous track times. It's got to be a guy like that. With a much higher ceiling, or a guy that's just a much better player, DeJuan Lane and all those guys. If they get two of the group that I just mentioned of Lane, Andrews, Menke, Miles, and Jalen McClain, which is where I think the board is. If I'm forgetting someone, Ryan, let me know. But if you can get one of those guys, then two of those guys, then they're good. It's just right now, if I were to tell you who of that group do you think they're going to get, you'd let me guess. You'd say maybe Davis Andrews, and after that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
Yeah. I mean, because I'm like just working through my head a little bit. I mean, for a while, I like Notre Dame's chances with Jalen McClain, but we've talked about that, obviously, that they got a little bit of that fade. Hopefully, Notre Dame can turn that one around, to your point. DeJuan Lane is a player that's interesting because there just didn't seem to be any traction early on, but obviously they got him to come on a visit, and things seem to be going in a better direction there. But ultimately, man, this is a troubling area on this team. One, because you need numbers. Right. You're in a bad spot. I mean, they need to go into the transfer portal this offseason just because the numbers are not great at the safety position. And then also, you've missed out over the last couple of years on a couple high-impact safeties on the back end from a recruiting perspective. Like, you need not only numbers, you need high-impact talents. You need it. So adding those both together with the fact that the safety board is a little bit all over the place right now, that gives you some hesitation or some question marks that are going to follow, obviously. Again, this is another one where you could feel a lot better about it. If just one or two things go your way, you can feel a lot better about it. Or the board might have to expand again. And
it's already starting to, Ryan. I mean, they offered a kid today from Louisiana. Now, I don't know where they are. I also know that they're still recruiting Jason Mitchell, but I mean,
there's nothing there though.
I put him in he's talked about visiting for an official this summer.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I put him in the same category as Aaron Childs. Okay, sure, I'll believe it when I see it, number one. But number two, just because you're coming on official, like Richard Young came on an official.
Yes.
Like, what does that mean?
Wasn't that the most random official of all time,
Yeah,
by the way? It was
it
probably
was.
Richard
It
Young.
was. It was. But the reality is they've got to close strong. Now, again, there's good guys on the board. I'm not worried about the board. I like the board, Ryan. It's just I don't have a lot of faith right now that they're going to be able to close on that board because there's two problems working against you. Number one is Chris O'Leary, for whatever reason, just hasn't been able to close on those guys. Let's just be honest. He hasn't. And I would argue that if you look at the two guys they got last year, other coaches played as big of a role as those guys getting Notre Dame as Chris O'Leary did. Not that he doesn't deserve any credit. He does deserve credit, but you got to know Don Schuler very well. Marcus Freeman not being the head, Marcus Freeman is not the head coach, I don't know that Don Schuler's at Notre Dame, especially once the Georgias and the Bamas and those schools. Like when he committed to Notre Dame, he wasn't planning on committing. It was just a combination of Notre Dame being Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman being Marcus Freeman, right? Chad Bowden had a huge role in getting Ben Minich to Notre Dame. Now, Coach O'Leary played a role as well. I'm not trying to take it away from him, but he hasn't shown himself to be that dynamic recruiter that can go out and do that. Very good position coach, in my opinion, but just hasn't been able to sell himself the way that you'd think a guy that developed a first-round NFL draft pick and has got the production he got out of the roster they had last year, has turned a converted corner and a converting wide receiver into a safety tandem that went out and helped you beat South Carolina, just hasn't tracked. Hopefully this is the year that happens. And if, give me Davis Andrews and DeJuan Lane or Davis Andrews and Paul Menke or DeJuan Lane and Paul. I mean, there's a lot of combinations that can make this really work, Ryan. And it's just going to be a very important thing. Get that done. Very important. And it's probably the position I'm the least confident in right now, just based on track record. But I do like the fact that it's a good board right now.
Yep.
It is a really good board right now. And you're right, though. They may need to expand it as they try to find it, which would get, if you start seeing them throwing out a bunch of safety offers, get worried.
Yeah.
Because it means they don't think they're going to close on the guys that they have.
Yeah. And it's going to be fascinating to watch, obviously, because again, this is one of those not quite as boom or bust as linebacker, because I actually think the linebacker position, if they close on the couple of guys we talked about, I think it could have a little bit of a higher ceiling than what the safety position is going to end up being if they hit like a little bit of a home run there. But I still think that there's not a lot of middle ground for this safety class, in my opinion. Like this is either going to be a good to very good safety class, or it's going to be an underwhelming safety class where you're going to have to go to some plan B or plan C options. Like that's kind of where you are with the safety position. And to your points, Brian, there have been some questionable recruiting from Al Washington that we've talked about in the past. There's been some questionable recruiting from Al Golden in the past. But you know what both those guys have done before in their careers at some point? They have recruited at a nice level. They have at times, right? Chris O'Leary, you have no proof that he can recruit at a high level. You have zero proof about it. I think that there's a lot of proof that he can coach football well, which is great. But we know that college football is not just a on-field experience, right? Like that's the NFL, guys. The NFL, that's about being able to coach and put guys in proper position and be able to win that way. But college football is predicated on recruiting at a high level as well. And there is some question marks, obviously, at the safety position. But the other positions that we have question marks on, you mentioned Joe Rudolph as well, right? Joe Rudolph has recruited very well at times in his career. Al Golden has recruited very well at times in his career. Al Washington has recruited very well at times in his career before Notre Dame. Chris O'Leary, there's just not a track record, and there's not something to give you optimism that he can get it turned around. It's question marks right now. And you can't lie to yourself about that. There is question marks. Doesn't mean that he can't prove you wrong, right? It doesn't mean that he can't be a really good recruiter, but until he does, there are question marks, which is okay. Yeah. It's just that's the facts, though. It is a fact right now.
If he can land a really good class this year, I think it could be the start of something. That's the big thing with Chris O'Leary, is because if he can start getting higher level players, his ability to coach is going to start shining through even more. And that's the thing, is like look, if he can, develop a Don and Ben Minich, and if Xavier has the jump that we hope that he can have, and then you can, if you're able, I don't care. I don't care if Chris O'Leary gets zero credit for bringing in the safety class this year. I don't care. Get him good safeties, because I think the guy can coach. That's the thing. I think the guy can flat out coach. I just don't know if he can bring in the best, the top players. Like with Mike Mickens, Mike Mickens can flat out coach, but he's also proven he can flat out recruit as well.
Yes.
Chancey Stuckey has proven he can recruit at a high level. His coaching has been good so far. We need to see it take another jump next year. So, but it's the dual threat aspect of it that is needed. Dylan McCullough has shown he can do both at a very high level.
Yep.
And the guys that aren't doing either or both of those need to step up. Chris O'Leary, I think, has done a very good job coaching, but talent acquisition is just as important as coaching, in my opinion, especially the skill position. And I don't care about top 100 guys. Give me talented guys wherever they're ranked. And I'll feel good about it, because I do feel like he's a coach that can maximize the ability of his players. And that's going to be an interesting thing. Ryan, I want to finish up with this. Let's talk about one potential surprise recruit. Who could you see someone right now that we just don't think Notre Dame's in a great shot at right now on both sides of the ball that we could see Notre Dame getting when it's all said and done? So let's start on the offensive side of the ball. So a guy that, again, not a guy that they're second for right now that we think they're going to get, but maybe someone that we're not talking a lot about, or that people aren't talking enough about, or a guy that is not someone that people are trending to Notre Dame, those type of things on each side of the ball. I have mine, Ryan, on offense. I'll let you start off and give me yours just in case. So I don't want to steal your thunder in case we have the same guy.
I think it's got to be one of the running backs. Like, it has to be on offense, because the way I look at it right now, Brian, is if you do push the wide receivers to 4, I feel pretty good about Notre Dame getting Jason Robinson. And we've talked about that a ton. Tight end wise, it remains to be seen if you are going to push that number to 2 or not. So that is a little bit of a question mark. Offensive line wise, for me, like, it wouldn't shock me if they got Gerby Lambert. It wouldn't shock me at all. Like, it would just be like, okay, that's cool. They did pull that one off. For me, it's got to be one of the running backs, because yes, things appear to be in a good spot with Keidron Young out of Texas, but I mean, he's never been on campus yet. He would only have taken an official to Notre Dame in June, obviously, and you're still getting a high quality back out of Lufkin, Texas. Like, that matters, right? So I think whether it is Keidron Young or Anthony Carey, I think that would be monumental for Notre Dame. And I think that would be a slight surprise for me, because I just look at it and I say, we're talking about a running back out of the state of Texas, and we're talking about a running back out of the state of Florida. Like, there's a lot of competition for those two players. So if Notre Dame gets either one of those running backs, I think that would be a little bit of an upset, and I think that would be monumental for them. And I just offensively, I feel like the class is, like, outside of maybe one more wide receiver and an offensive lineman on top of the running backs, a couple offensive linemen, your offensive class is almost done, man. Like, you're almost ready to kind of call this thing quits. So I really think it's one of the 2 running backs, man. Take Keidron Young or Anthony Carey, either one. I think that would be a bit of an upset for Notre Dame.
Keidron Young was my pick just because of the Texas aspect. I mean, there's a lot of good schools in Texas and want that kid. That would be mine. And we don't talk about it a ton. Defensively, Ryan, who is your guy?
I mean, Caleb Beasley would be the guy for me. I mean, we talk about him, so this one isn't like a perfect fit into this category, but I don't think we talk about it enough. The fact that there are a lot of tea leaves around this one, Brian, where you're like, although he is committed to the University of Tennessee, an in-state school, a school that he grew up obviously with a deep knowledge of and a fan of, right? And the fact that they have some momentum as far as the what they're developing under Josh Heupel over there, keeps talking to Notre Dame, man. Goes on a visit to Notre Dame. I think that there is legitimate smoke there. And although it's not one where I would necessarily predict it today to flip at some point, I still think that there's a legitimate chance that you get a Caleb Beasley down the road. So he would 100% be mine on defense, because again, I just feel like, I could have went Elijah Rushing. He was the other way I was going to go, because that one is, yes, you're in the game, but it's not necessarily you're in a great position for, but everyone's talking about Elijah Rushing right now. I think that not enough people are talking about the fact that Caleb Beasley still talks to Notre Dame and talks to him a lot. Yeah. And that says a lot. I think it says a lot for just how much respect he has for Marcus Freeman and the staff.
Yeah, see the Caleb Beasley one for me obviously is because I talk about him so much. I just don't view him as a surprise. That just for me personally, I think you make good arguments. I think for me, I'm trying to think of a guy that would be a surprise. I mean, obviously we talked about Chris Cole. I don't think that'd be a surprise. I think Elijah Rushing would be a surprise if he did it right now. But I think by the time we get to the visit, we'll know if Notre Dame's a player, and it won't
You
be a
know who would be
surprise.
my second on the list? A
Yeah.
different guy is Malachi Williams. Would be I
Yes.
think still a surprise,
That's
right?
where
I
I was
mean,
going to kind of go. Yeah.
yeah. I
Because
mean,
he
because yeah. Go ahead.
with Elijah Ryan, he had Notre Dame in very high regard early. It's now
Yes.
getting back to that. With
Yep.
Malachi, it was like he just doesn't seem to be all that excited about Notre Dame, right? And Penn State seems to be the team that's out in front, and doesn't seem to be a lot of interest there. Now all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, you're actually in the game now. I'd be much more surprised if they got him than I would Logan Thomas or even Elijah Rushing.
Same. Yeah.
Honestly, the other
Because
one to me is go ahead,
yeah.
Ryan.
I was just going to say for Malachi too, it's because he's a Pennsylvania guy. He's from Drexel Hill, which is just outside of Philadelphia. It's like a suburb of Philadelphia. And for people that aren't around this area a ton, this is very pro Penn State country where I
Yeah.
live, right? Like
Oh
very
yeah.
pro Penn State country. And I'll say this. I think that Notre Dame has a chance with Malachi because obviously he's planning an official visit now to Notre Dame after going on an unofficial. But this is one where the big reason that he even went to Notre Dame in the first place is because his coach and his mom. Like those are the big
Right.
reasons, right? Like this wasn't necessarily a Malachi decision to go see Notre
Right.
Dame. He was urged to go see
Right.
Notre Dame because he is a good fit with the
Right.
program. So
Which
that
is
would be a
what happened
surprise.
with Micah Gilbert, if
Yeah.
we're being honest, and he ended up in the class. That happened with Kenny Minchie. Kenny Minchie explained, sat down with him when he did an interview at Notre Dame, and he explained, like, I didn't really know a lot about Notre Dame or really know a lot about the tradition. My parents were the ones that encouraged me to look at Notre Dame. And,
Yep.
and then, of course, once he did, fell in love, and he ended up at Notre Dame. But you see that a lot more now because, again, most of these kids are 16 to 18 years old.
Yep.
And Notre Dame has, I mean, think about it. Charlie Weiss's first year in Notre Dame in 05, kids that were born in 05 are now like 17, 18 years old.
Right.
They were born in Charlie Weiss's first year. The kids that are being recruited now weren't even alive when Ty Willingham was the coach, much less Lou Holtz, right? And so that tradition is still alive more in the parents than it is the kids. And then, of course, the kids learn to respect the tradition and all that kind of stuff. And Notre Dame's recent success has been good. And so to me, my surprise, however, is going to be a safety. It's either going to be DeJuan Lane or a guy that's not really a guy we think is going to be. And I don't know who it is, but there's going to be I'm predicting that some safety that we're thinking Notre Dame doesn't have a shot at right now, whether it's DeJuan Lane, Jalen McClain, or some, Jason Mitchell, like right now would floor me if Jason Mitchell even showed up this summer, much less picked Notre Dame. There's going to be some safety like that we don't know about that's going to end up eventually jumping on board. That's my surprise pick. That could also be a little bit more wishful thinking, Ryan, than it is necessarily a surprise prediction. But I just have this feeling that that's going to happen as we move forward. And I think a lot of it's going to be because those guys are going to see what's being built in front of them.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like, okay, I don't know a lot about this guy O'Leary, but he seems to have done a pretty good job here. Kyle Hamilton speaks highly of him. But man, look at that D line they're putting together. Man, look at that linebacking class they're putting together. Boy, they got some pretty good corners that they've recruited. You know what I mean? I think that's going to be the thing that's ultimately going to allow Notre Dame to close on somebody big at safety. That's going to surprise us all.
Jason Mitchell is a really interesting one, Brian, if that ended up being that way, because one thing is that he played at Sarah, but he transferred to St. John Bosco for his senior year. So if they get Kingston Villamoasa, it's like, talk to your boy, man. Talk to your boy.
You see what I'm saying? So like that's what I'm like, dude, they got Justin Scott, they got Kingston, they got, they got Logan Thomas or Elijah Rushing or Malachi Williams or, and all of a sudden it's like, hey, hold on a second now. Well, let's look at this thing. If they flip Caleb Beasley or something like that, think the momentum that would come there. So I think it'll be something like that. That'll be the thing that kicks them over. And I really feel, and I could be completely wrong about this. But when I look at this group, Ryan, I look at it like this. I believe that once Chris O'Leary kicks the door down from a recruiting standpoint, it's going to be a flood. I really do. because I think it's going to signify a couple things. Number one is he's finding his recruiting group. Because what you have to understand about Chris O'Leary, Chancey Stuckey didn't have a very long track record of recruiting, but Chancey Stuckey was a big recruit, and Chancey Stuckey played the NFL for a number of years. Yep. He has big time experience. Chris O'Leary came to Notre Dame from a Division II school at Florida Tech. He played at Indiana State. This big time football is new to him in a lot of ways, and he's still learning how to communicate with these guys that, Marcus Freeman played at Notre Dame. Played at Ohio State, right? Al Washington played at Boston College. Al Golden played at Penn State. Chancey Stuckey played at Clemson. Yeah. Geno is the all-time passing leader at Cincinnati, right? Dylan McCullough played at, where did he play at?
Dylan played at,
was it Miami of Ohio?
Miami, Ohio, yeah.
Okay, yeah. But he was a D1 guy. He's won a Super Bowl. He's coached at USC. He's coached in the Big Ten. The point being, all these guys had some level of a track record. Mike Mickens is the closest thing you could get to it, but even because he was at Cincinnati and Bowling Green. But again, he played at Cincinnati under Brian Kelly. Yeah. He played on some really good teams there.
And O'Leary's still really young, too,
yes.
man. Like, he's a very young guy.
Right. Still. I think he's still learning, right? Yeah. So people say, why do you give him a pass? Because Al Washington's 35, 36 years old, who's been coaching a decade. Chris O'Leary's like 27, who was a GA 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm going to give him a little bit more of a pass. But I feel like if he does kick the door down, it means a couple things. Number one is the kids are finally buying into the product on the field. They're saying, like, wow, that guy did a good job getting that guy able to play. Like, what can he do with me? But it also would mean that he has found his way. People have asked, how do you be a good recruiter? It's just about, can you relate and communicate? And a lot of young coaches think relating means, I'll just be honest, when I'm a white coach talking to a black kid, I got to change how I talk. I got to pretend like I like music that he likes to somehow like demean myself because that's the only way. No, what those kids like is genuineness, right? Some of the best recruiters I know don't like rap music, but they're genuine, they're real, they're open, they care about these kids, right? And it's about, I'm not saying Chris O'Leary does that, I'm using an example. It's about, how do I relate to these kids? How do I communicate to them? How do I build that connection with them that can get them to trust me when I don't have the track record that Kirby Smart's staff has at developing players, that Alabama staff has at developing players, that Ohio State staff has at developing players? How do I get that? And once he figures that out and he gets comfortable in that way, and then the results start showing on the field, I think that's when you see the floodgates open. When he finds his happy place as a recruiter, then I think he's going to take off, because I think he's a very good position coach. I mean, there's a reason Marcus Freeman wanted this guy, because the backstory there is he was the, I think, analyst or GA that worked with the Rovers in Marcus Freeman's, I think the year before Marcus Freeman was hired, because Chris O'Leary coached safeties in 2021, correct, as well?
Yep.
And it was like he did a really good job with Jeremiah Usakora-Moa. There was this great reputation, and the players loved him. And so that's why Marcus Freeman chose him over some other more experienced safety candidates when it came down to who's going to be the new safety coach under Marcus Freeman. And then Coach Freeman kept him in his first year as the head coach. There's a reason. He sees a lot of potential there. But eventually that potential's got to turn into results in both areas. But I really feel like once he figures it out and gets comfortable in kind of his own skin as a recruiter, I think the results are going to start being really impressive, because I think the guy can flat out coach. And and the kids love him. So like, he can relate to players that he knows that are there. I think he's a very honest, genuine guy. It's more of, how do I strike this up from some kid I don't know and build it that way? That's a different animal, man. And I'm telling you, that takes some time to get to know, especially like I did it at the Division III and 1AA level. That's a whole different animal than trying to do it to some kid that just got off the phone with Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. Believe me, right? And that's new to him because he came from Florida Tech, right? So that's where I'm coming from. I think the light's going to go on. He's just going to connect with some kid, and then that kid's going to surprise everybody and come. And then I just think the floodgates open at that point in time.
Let's hope.
That's where I'm seeing.